Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm privileged and honored to have Dr. Alan Keyes as our special guest today. I want you to stay by your radios for the next 30 minutes and don't miss our interview with Dr. Alan Keyes. By way of introduction, Alan Keyes spent 11 years with the U.S. State Department. He served in the U.S. Foreign Service and on the staff of the National Security Council before becoming Ronald Reagan's Assistant Secretary of State. In the interim, from 1983 to 1985, he served as ambassador to the United Nations. He was the president of Citizens Against Government Waste and founder of the National Taxpayers Action Day, two-time Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate in Maryland. He's hosted his own syndicated radio show. He's well-educated. He has a Ph.D. in government from Harvard, wrote his dissertation on constitutional theory. He served as interim president of Alabama A&M University. He speaks French and has studied Spanish, Russian, and ancient Greek. He's the author of Masters of the Dream, The Strength and Betrayal of Black America, and Our Character, Our Future, Reclaiming America's Moral Destiny. He's a pro-life champion and dedicated family man. He and his wife Jocelyn have 3 children. Alan's stated purpose in life, like that of America's founders, is to provide a secure future for our posterity. Welcome, Dr. Alan Keyes, to our program today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, you have decided here to throw your hat into the ring for president on the Republican Party ticket in 2008. Would you give us a little insight into your thinking as to why you chose to do this?
Well, like a lot of people, I had watched over the course of the several months before I finally stepped in September, hoping that I would see something that would represent my heart and conscience and the really urgent need to return to principle that I think is the desperate crying need of our country right now. And I saw no one who represented these things, particularly in terms of the moral issues we have on the Republican side now, a media that is determined to convince us that the only choices we have are people who have no commitment to moral principle, no stand on the life issue, or people like Rudy Giuliani who are dedicated to the pro-abortion position and have throughout their careers been championing that position. He and Mitt Romney both spent their entire careers championing abortion and gay marriage and all of the things that for a long time people at the grassroots have been working to preserve us from on the Republican side, and yet now we're told that these 2 gentlemen are the only choices we're to have, and then you have others who will either support them or who, even when they disagree with them, are not stating what I think is the real challenge of our time, which is that if we don't return to the godly moral principles stated in our Declaration of Independence on which our claim to liberty is based, if we don't respect them in our laws and in our practices, then we're going to lose this republic, lose self-government, lose liberty, and not pass it on to future generations. I think that's the key issue that now confronts the American people. It's not being articulated. It's not being presented. They will have, right now, no choice if I hadn't stepped forward to try to make sure that folks who really care about these things will be able to see a candidate who reflects their true conviction, their true conservative convictions, rather than having to give up something that is vital to the country, whether on the moral front, the economic front, the security front, the border front. It seems that you have candidates who are good on some of these things, but no one is willing to take the comprehensive approach that will really preserve the integrity of our republic and its liberty in all its aspects.
One of the things that I appreciate about your stand is your emphasis on the Declaration principles, and you have articulated very well how that our Constitution, along with our Declaration of Independence and our Bill of Rights, must be taken as a whole and not separated. Would you like to elaborate on that just a little bit?
Well, I think it's vitally important because we claim our liberty based on our recognition of the authority of God. That's what was stated in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And it goes on to say that that's the reason that you have to have representative government, government based on consent, because of that endowment from Almighty God. Now, if we exercise the rights we get from God in such a way as to deny his authority and deny his existence, then we undermine our claim as a people to the liberty that we enjoy. And I think we are now in that self-contradiction on issues like abortion, on how we're dealing with the marriage issue. And it shows in the weakening of our sense of sovereignty, both at the personal level, as we see all kinds of invasions of our rights and liberties, which we're just sitting on our hands and accepting in the name of the war on terror or in the name of protection against so-called guns and so forth. We're seeing the destruction of our individual personal sovereignty. We're seeing the destruction of the sovereignty of the people at the constitutional level. Abusive judges who are substituting their opinions for the views and actions of representative legislatures, which are supposed to make the laws, but whose power is being usurped now by these judges on issues like family, on abortion, on gay marriage, and things of this kind. It is really appalling. Fundamental issues to the character and future of the country now being decided by a little clique of jurists who are substituting their will for the will of the people. And finally, of course, we see the collapse of sovereignty along our border, where we have given up, apparently, or at least the elites who are supposed to be representing us, have given up the notion that we even have borders. We have people flooding across those borders without let or hindrance, our laws not being enforced, and in fact that means that as a physical entity, the United States of America is being erased from the map. And so with these threats to our sovereignty, it's clear that we can't surrender the principles of our sovereignty as a people, except we also endure the destruction of that sovereignty. In fact, I think that's what's going on. I think that's the issue that confronts us now, and it's not just an issue of this issue or that. Are we as a people going to do what's necessary to reclaim our position as the sovereign body of the people, according to our Constitution and the great principles on the basis of which our rights come from God? If we don't get back to those principles and to the strong character and the assertive character of liberty that are represented by those principles, then we are in the process right now of losing that heritage of freedom which we're supposed to hand on to our posterity.
We see in the Republican Party, in this election especially, a shift, it seems to me, in priority. Contrary to the Republican platform and contrary to the public positions of the party in years gone by, it seems today that we have candidates representing or seeking to represent the Republican Party whose convictions and values counter those stated positions. I'm speaking specifically of a couple that you've already articulated earlier, Giuliani and Mitt Romney. Now we find that there are many within the so-called religious right that are beginning to coalesce around these gentlemen in the name of the lesser of two evils. In other words, we must elect a Republican, even if the Republican is pro-abortion, pro-gay rights, pro-gun control, etc. It's better than to have the Democrat. Would you comment on that a little bit?
Well, I think that that's a position that simply destroys the future of our country, in which we're basically saying that one way or another we must embrace the destruction of America. But if you embrace the destruction of America, will somebody tell me whether it matters that it wears a Republican label or a Democrat label? It's still destroyed. And I think that that is the key issue that we ought to be thinking about and what ought to be determining our stand. When people say the lesser of evils, I look at it and I say, but wait a minute, either of these evils destroys the Republic, destroys our liberty, turns our children into slaves who would then face awesome evils in terms of things like human cloning and the creation of embryos for the destruction of human life, and all these things that then break down and erode the moral conscience that has been the mainstay, really, of progress and justice in this country's life. Those are simply evil. And to pretend that because it wears a Republican label, that evil represents something less than when it wears a Democrat label, actually it's the other way around. Wearing a Republican label, as we can see, it can confuse and gain the support of people who would otherwise stand firmly against the destruction of these things that represent our liberty. So in that sense, putting a Republican label on this evil is more insidious, more dangerous, more deadly than when it wears the label of a party that has long since been known for its abandonment of American principle. And that's why I think this is a particularly dangerous, particularly watershed election year. And yet, whether you're looking at people like Giuliani and Romney and Fred Thompson and McCain, who are outright opponents of our sovereignty as a people, or you're talking about some of the folks in the second tier, like a Mike Huckabee, who sounds good on the moral issues, and then when you examine his record in the state of Arkansas, it turns out that he's basically a liberal. And I'm asking myself, can't we get a true conservative? Someone who's going to conserve the liberty, the constitutional sovereignty, the borders and strength and national security of our country? Do we have to sacrifice these things in order to get one or the other of what we believe is vital to the future of the nation? I don't think that's right. I think America should be preserved as a whole. And that's why I've stood forward to try to offer the comprehensive conservative alternative proven by the track record of many years of fighting on the front lines for these important values and articulating them in a way that can help people to understand how important they are and motivate them to stand forward and do something about it.
One of the things that I find disconcerting is the way that some of our leaders in the so-called religious right have been coming out publicly supporting some of these obviously liberal Republican candidates. We have Bob Jones recently came out endorsing Romney. We have just recently now Paul Weyrich coming out in favor of Giuliani, of all things. Excuse me, we have Pat Robertson. Excuse me, Pat Romney. That's Robertson right. That's right. Pat Robertson came out for Giuliani. How does this? What do we make of this?
Well, I would have to tell you, Chuck, I think the grassroots people of the country are making of it what they ought to make of it, that it's a serious betrayal of their heart and conscience. I went around this country for many years, as you know, and you have done also, trying to get people of good faith and Christian conscience to step forward, get involved in the political arena, and so forth. And now to find these folks who were encouraging people to do this, then betraying the conscience of these good-hearted people by inviting them to support folks who are standing for positions diametrically opposed to what God requires. This is a travesty. This is a scandal. This is the millstone sin that Christ said ought to be punished by having a millstone tied around your neck and have you thrown into the river. I think it's a disgrace. But I think it is, in fact, disgracing these leaders. They think that they're going to mislead a whole lot of folks. But I think that there are people of good instinct, heart, and conscience at the grassroots. Yes, they're confused, they're dismayed, they're discouraged, but they're not going to vote for evil. And that means that on Election Day, unless they're given a better choice, they'll simply sit back and say, look, my Lord saved me. And therefore, I'm bought and paid for by Jesus. I won't be bought and paid for by you and your false promises and your false politics and your betrayal of goodness and justice. I think there are a lot of people who will feel that way, and the Republicans will suffer gravely as a result. They are not going to gain by the betrayal of these leaders. Instead, these leaders will be discredited by their betrayal of God's will.
Yeah, amen to that. Let me ask you now, your campaign is taking you where next?
Well, we are actually trying to go all over. I'm out to California in the course of the next couple of days, and then down to Mississippi, and we'll be in various parts of the country, obviously. But I consider that the effort isn't really just about me, though. We have been making a real grassroots effort at AlanKeyes.com, AlanKeyes.com. And if folks can find a way to get to that website, they'll find there what we call the Pledge for America's Revival. It's a challenge to active citizenship, so that people not only think about the choice they're going to make on Election Day, but they make a choice and commit themselves right now to stand forward and become the leaders in their family, in their church, in their workplace, finding others who will come forward and make the same pledge so that we can start now to build the army of transformation that's needed to uphold the return to our godly principles. And so really I consider that everywhere you have someone who's taken that pledge and who is at work keeping that pledge, you have a representative of what we call America's Revival, who's promoting this effort. And so we're all over the country, in all 50 states. We've got folks who have signed up and who are finding more. And we hope as that number builds, it is going to exemplify the truth that there are a whole lot of people of good conscience who not only haven't given up on America, but are willing to stand forward and do something about it. Not accept this kind of armchair, eyes glued to the television notion of citizenship that really leaves the decision as to our choice in the hands of ungodly media and ungodly money, and therefore we get an ungodly result. If people want a better result, then they're going to have to stand forward and make make it happen, make the choice themselves by making the effort that's necessary to get their choice where it belongs.
What do you see as the future for the Republican Party should someone such as Giuliani or even Mitt Romney become the nominee?
I think if the Republican Party, step one, betrays what has been its stated goal of providing a moral alternative to the Democrat Party's abandonment of American moral principle, or if it tries to lie to people like Mitt Romney is doing, and while standing on a record of total betrayal of those principles, mouths the words so that you can keep gulling people into giving votes. I think people see through all of this. And they are sick to death of it. It's part of the reason that there's no excitement. I notice these articles keep coming out. Why are people not choosing? Why is there no winnowing? Why are folks not consolidating? It's because on the Republican side, they're not being offered choices that are worth the effort. They're not being offered an honest election that actually presents choices that correspond to the people's will and conscience. And so I think that if it goes down that road, the party is going to disintegrate. Americans aren't helpless. It may take some time, but they will put together and gather round an alternative that is based on a commitment to constitutional principle, declaration principle, and the avowed willingness to stand in defense of these values, whether it comes to our own personal sovereignty and behavior, as with abortion, or our national sovereignty in terms of defending our borders and securing the integrity of the territory over which the people of the United States govern. I think they're going to insist on this. It's taking people a little while to wake up to the deep extent of the betrayal that's been going on. But as they wake up, they're getting angry, and I think they're going to take action as a result.
Well, you said the disintegration of the Republican Party. Now, if that happens, or anything close to it, that would almost necessitate the rise of a third or independent party. Do you foresee that could happen?
I surely do, yes. As a matter of fact, I think one of the things that dismays me a little bit, or did dismay me before I stepped into the race, as I watched what these other candidates were doing, is that when they were asked the question about whether they would support a Giuliani or someone like this, Huckabee and these folks actually said yes.
Right.
And I don't understand this. I mean, at what point are you going to be honest enough to admit that you can't betray God and conscience for the sake of some party label? And if you're not honest enough to stand before people and admit that that's the case so they will know what's at stake, then it seems to me you're not sincere in all your professions of pro-life moral principle and moral leadership and all that. It's just talk, for which people are not willing to pay any price, give any political capital. Just like Mitt Romney spent his whole career lying to get elected, he says, by being pro-abortion. Now he's going to lie to be elected by being pro-life. The only thing we can be sure of is that he's an ambitious politician. That's all we can be sure of. And I'm frankly beginning to think that's all we can be sure of with any of them. Because if you're not willing to be honest, if you're not willing to risk the price that must be paid, if principle is to be rightly articulated and rightly defended, then why should anybody trust you to stand for it when the going gets tough? That's precisely been the problem with all these people. When the chips are down, they prefer their own ambition, their own political empires to doing what they promised the people they would do. And that's part of the reason that the Republican performance on promise has been so bad over the course of the last decade.
We've heard some of the so-called leaders of the religious right here recently talk about the possibility of the rise of a third party should the Republicans nominate a pro-choice representative for next year's election. If such a party would... let me say personally, I gave up on the Republican Party back in 2004, as you know. And I've been involved in the Constitution Party. I personally perceive that to be a party of principle, a party that I think could carry the banner that you have just beautifully outlined in your presentation so far in the national elections. However, I wonder how many of those leaders who are now talking about this kind of a phenomenon are they just doing that to try to scare the Republican leadership into maybe moderating some of their radical left-wing views and then coming home to the party in the end, or do you think they really are serious in their contemplation of a third party?
Well, I have to say that I have grave doubts about their seriousness at this stage. And I say that in particular because some of the ones who have been vocal saying, oh, if this happened with Giuliani, we go for a third party, are then the ones stepping forward and in various and assorted ways promoting Mitt Romney.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, but wait a minute. Unless you're just willing to stand before your constituents and lie, right? How can you pretend that Mitt Romney offers an alternative when everything he's ever done in his political career until he decided to run for president was pro-abortion, pro-gay, and deeply committed to the destruction of everything that the Republican Party in the past and up to now has professed to stand for on these moral issues? I consider that to be a clear evidence either of deception or self-deception, I don't know which. But in that case, it doesn't give evidence of a really strong and clear-headed understanding that will then stand firm with the need to part company with the Republican Party if they nominate Giuliani. Instead, I have a feeling these will be the people who say, oh, well, he decided to make Mike Huckabee his running mate, so he can't be so bad. Or they'll be like Brownback, who took my breath away the other day. After all the years he's fought for pro-life, he goes and talks to Giuliani and says, oh, he's not so bad, he's against partial birth abortion.
Yeah.
Which, of course, proves nothing except that he's like some of the worst pro-abortion Democrats. So when you get right down to it, we're looking at a time when these leaders, I think, are revealing that they are chaff. You know, the Bible says that the unrighteous will be like chaff before the wind, and Christ talked about separating the wheat from the chaff in that wind. I think a strong driving wind is separating wheat from chaff right now. And I think the hearts of the people of discernment at the grassroots are watching this happen and making that separation because they can recognize what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. Let's shift gears just a minute. Talk a little bit about the war in Iraq. Regardless of whether we feel it was a mistake to invade Iraq or not, we are there. We are engaged in a situation that is becoming more and more problematic in terms of our extraction, in terms of the proliferation of risk and danger, not only in Iraq and Afghanistan, but now throughout the rest of the Middle East. We seem to be compounding problem upon problem. What do you foresee, and how would you address the Iraq situation and the Middle Eastern situation in general as president?
Well, the first thing I think we have to be clear about, which has been a great failing of the G.W. Bush administration, is we have to be clear that if we're engaged in a war or in an exercise in which we're using our military power, it's got to be for the sake of the clear strategic interest of the people of the United States. This whole business of articulating all this rhetoric about nation building in Iraq and all of this, I mean, I am one of those people who deeply believe that all human beings deserve liberty, but I also know that you can't give it to them. And you certainly can't procure it for them at the point of a gun. So the whole idea that you're going to invade a country and that the reason you invaded was to bring with you self-government, that's nonsense. And I think it is that nonsense that has undermined both the understanding, the morale, the commitment of the American people to this whole exercise. Now, that doesn't mean, though, Chuck, that I don't see that there's a real danger in this world right now to the United States. Among the many dangers we face, many of which, as you know, are internal, we do face the existence in the world and have for some decades of an organized element out there of terrorist organizations and groups, many of them fomented in the Middle East, deeply committed to the destruction of American life and indeed of our whole civilization as something that they believe represents truly satanic evil. And that undermines what they think Allah requires that there should be in the world. This isn't going to go away because we wish it away. And if we foolishly drop our defenses and think we can cower down behind our own, in a passive way behind our own borders, then our people are just going to die, and they're going to die in great numbers. So I think we have to combine hard-headed strategy with a clear statement that that protection of our country's interest and the lives of our people is the purpose for any military exercise we engage in. Second, in terms of things that are contributing to or not contributing to stability in the Middle East or elsewhere, that's not just our responsibility. And there I think we have to demand that other nations, including a lot of the ones like Iran and Syria that are contributing to and fomenting the problem, acknowledge their responsibility and that others work in order to make sure that they don't achieve their nefarious purposes, not just of killing us, but indeed of destabilizing whole regions of the world so that they can advance their power. I think that's the combination that we should have been pursuing all along, of our own willingness to defend ourselves where need be, to pursue the use of our military force where we think it's necessary to find and kill the terrorists who are trying to kill Americans, but to make clear the distinction between that strategic purpose and anything that has to do with nation building and the promotion of all these wonderful values, because that is not just the responsibility of the United States. And I think we encourage irresponsibility, fecklessness, as well as encouraging, I think, the bad purposes of the folks who do have this violent agenda, if we don't demand that other countries see and live up to their responsibility, whether it's in their own particular region, as in the Middle East, or overall in the international community.
So, if you were president after the elections next year, are our troops staying in Iraq and Afghanistan, or do you see an exit strategy in which we could bring them home?
Well, let's be clear there, Chuck. I believe we face a real danger. And I don't believe we can deal with that danger. I never have. This goes back 20 years to the debate that occurred during the Reagan years between those of us who felt we had to have a proactive strategy against terrorism and others, including then Vice President Bush and his cohort, who felt that we could just be passive about it and help strengthen our own little targets at home and so forth. We see where that led. It led to 9/11. It led ultimately to the destruction of life and to the opening of this country to grave danger. I think when you're dealing with terrorists, you have to be proactive, you have to be offensive, you have to, through intelligence and the right application of force, you have to identify their nefarious plans, their networks, and you have to smash those networks before they kill your people. Insofar as our presence in the Middle East serves those particular purposes, my aim would not be to withdraw those forces, but to use them effectively to achieve a victory over those who are trying to kill us. And I think it's time we stop talking about it. You don't build a huge military force and equip and arm them with means that are the best ever seen in the history of humankind in order to keep them out of danger. You do it so that they can deal effectively with the dangers that are posed to this country. And I will promise the American people to make use of those forces as they are intended to be used to destroy the dangers that threaten us. And insofar as that's a purpose that can be served, whether it's by their being in the Middle East or by sending forces elsewhere, that's what we're going to have to do. And it's time we grew up and faced that fact. And I think that this whole notion that somehow or another, after 4 years of war in which we've lost several thousand casualties, right? Several thousand casualties, I think it's somewhere between 4 and 5 still, is less than we lost on a single day of battle in most of the historic struggles in which this country has been engaged. I'm just worried about what it says, about our will, about our cohesive moral character, about our courage as a people, that we are letting this effort somehow sap our morale rather than simply hard-headedly considering the danger, make sure we meet the danger, don't accept a whole lot of foolish rhetoric which clouds our purposes, but continue to do what we need to do until we are sure that we have dealt with the enemy who intends to destroy us. Because at the end of the day, Chuck, war doesn't end because you wish it would. War ends when your enemy has been so broken in will, spirit, and means that they can no longer pose a threat to you. That's when war ends, and that's when you bring your forces home.
We only have about 2 minutes left, so I know we're going to be crunched for time. But just real quickly, I find it amazing that while we're supposedly fighting a war on terrorism halfway around the world in Iraq and Afghanistan, we leave our borders wide open for potential terrorists to come into our country. What do you think about this matter of open borders and illegal immigration?
I think this is one of the reasons that Bush has had such little credibility in dealing with our national security. Who can believe him? Who can believe that you care about the security of this country and then are colluding with the Mexican elites and other forces to destroy our borders, to let drug dealers and others run free by putting our border guards in prison when they enforce the law, and by allowing hundreds of illegal immigrants every day to cross into this country without let or hindrance, without a proper enforcement of the law, without building the necessary barriers? What I would do, first, recognize the threat, establish a national border guard that is trained and organized to deal with the whole threat. It's not just a police threat, it's a military threat. We have to treat it as such. Build the barrier. A combination of fences, electronic means, satellite surveillance, tied in with that National Border Guard as a rapid deployment force that can move quickly to deal with situations as they develop. And third, and important, I'd involve the citizenry. You have a lot of good folks, whether it's through the Minutemen or elsewhere, who have stepped forward and said, we want to help. Why don't we do what folks did during World War II and elsewhere? Organize them into citizen surveillance groups that can help out by reporting what's going on in an orderly fashion, give them proper orientation, and let them help. This is the kind of thing that I think will help to restore the integrity and strength of our borders, and at the same time, it will encourage a revolution in our understanding of what it means to be a citizen again.
Wow.
And I think all of those things would be useful purposes that help to rebuild our sense of sovereignty as a people.
Well done. Alan Keyes, our guest today. And one more time, Alan, tell people how they can reach you.
Well, they can go to alankeyes.com, ALANKEYES.com. If you don't have a computer at home, go to the library, go wherever, and go to the site. Consider the pledge. I hope you will sign on, not just as a commitment to me and to what we're doing right now, but as a commitment to be part of what I think is going to be a necessary and vital movement to restore respect for our godly principles and to restore the real foundation and reality of our sovereignty as a free people.
Very good. Alan Keyes, our guest today. Thank you very much, Dr. Keyes, for being with us on the show today.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Chuck, for all you've done.